When people hear the name Napoleon, they usually think of fierce battles and great victories. Napoleon loved being in the army more than being around fancy novels. The sound of cannons, soldiers on horseback, and the sight of weapons flashing in the sun made him feel alive. Like music does for most people. In fact, Napoleon once said that cries of the dying and tears of the hopeless surrounded my cradle from birth. But before he became a famous general, Napoleon was a child, born on August 15, 1769, in a small town called Ajaccio, on the island of Corsica. Corsica is a beautiful, tree-covered island in the Mediterranean Sea, just 50 miles from Italy. At that time, the people of Corsica were fighting to stay independent from France, which had just taken control of the island. They fought hard, but in the end, France won, and shortly after, Napoleon was born. His mother, Napoleon Bonaparte, was a strong and beautiful woman. Napoleon respected her deeply and never let anyone speak badly of her. Even later in life, he said his success came from her teachings and her example. "It is to my mother that I owe my success," he said. Napoleon was Letitia's fourth child. Though two of his older siblings had passed away when they were young, only his older brother Joseph survived. Napoleon's father, Charles Bonaparte, was a lawyer and from a respected family. But he was a carefree man. When the French arrived in Corsica, he joined an army to defend the island, but eventually accepted France's rule. The Bonaparte family home in Ajaccio still stands today. Though it has been repaired many times, it wasn't a mansion, but it had a ballroom, big drawing room, a study, bedrooms, and a nursery. Some of the old furniture still remains, like the couch where Napoleon was born and his mother's small piano. As a child, Napoleon was known for his strong personality. He was confident, quick-tempered, and would often kick, bite, or scratch other children if they annoyed him. His mother tried her best to curb his temper, but with little success. Napoleon even shared a story from his childhood that showed his mother strict discipline. Once, she told him not to climb the fig trees in their garden because she was worried he might fall. But one day, Napoleon climbed up and picked all the figs. He was caught by the gardener, who told his mother. When she discovered that he had eaten all the figs, she punished him with a spanking. Napoleon learned his letters from his mother and his uncle, while an archdeacon taught him some Bible stories. He went to a school run by nuns, where he learned basic reading, writing, and arithmetic at school. He once had a crush on a girl, and other boys made fun of him, teasing him with a rhythm about Napoleon and his half-worn stockings. He wasn't known as a handsome or a cheerful boy. He had sallow complexion, was often untidy, and tended to be moody. But he loved math and geography. Even as a young boy, he enjoyed solving problems and figuring out calculations. Once, he visited a windmill and asked the miller how much grain it ground each hour. He then worked out how much that would be per day and per week. Napoleon spent a lot of time outdoors, drawing pictures of soldiers and writing sums on walls. His mother even built him a small wooden hut where he could work in peace. If his brother Joseph disturbed him while he was working, Napoleon would often chase him off angrily. "My brother Joseph and I often fought. He was beaten, bitten, and insulted," Napoleon recalled. He explained how his mother disciplined him strictly but fairly, allowing nothing selfish or dishonest to take root in him. She valued the truth and obedience and corrected every mistake. Although his father was often busy, his mother made sure to watch over her children closely. Napoleon's father knew his son had the qualities of a soldier. Meanwhile, his older brother Joseph was meant for a more peaceful path. His father wanted him to become a priest. Charles Bonaparte received help from a man named Marbeuf, a French official who supported Napoleon's education and often visited their home. At 9 years old, Napoleon was ready to leave Corsica to pursue a larger world, one that would one day make him famous. He went from being a poor boy on a small island to becoming one of the most powerful men in Europe. In France, there were 12 military schools for sons of the proper nobility, where students could study for free. Napoleon's father, Charles Bonaparte, was able to secure a spot for him with the help of Marbeuf, a family connection. However, Charles had to prove that they were indeed poor and had been part of the nobility for at least 4 generations. With this done, Napoleon could start his studies in military training. Since Napoleon and his family spoke Italian, he needed to learn French first. So Napoleon stayed briefly at the College of Autun with his brother Joseph to pick up the language. Throughout his life, though, he continued to struggle with spelling, pronunciation, and handwriting. In December 1778, Charles Bonaparte, along with his sons Napoleon and Joseph, set out for France. Napoleon's mother, Laetitia, tearfully said goodbye to her sons, but was comforted by her other children who stayed behind. During their journey, they passed through Florence, which left a strong impression on young Napoleon, who admired the city's beauty and the brief sighting of the Grand Duke. On January 1st, 1779, they reached Autun. The boys soon felt how different this place was from home. Many people saw Corsicans as rough and uncivilized. After a few months, Napoleon left Autun in April for Brienne, a school that would become closely associated with his early life. It's said that Joseph cried as he said goodbye, but Napoleon only shed a single tear, which according to the school's sub-principal, the Abbé Simon, showed his strong will to hide his emotions. Brienne and other military schools were run by monks, which was common at that time since religion was central to French society before the Revolution. The school's head was called the Superior, and monks taught subjects like history, geography, and mathematics, as well as war strategy, in addition to a broad education. Students focused on military training, which would later serve Napoleon well. Life at Brienne was strict and structured. Students could not leave the school grounds for the entire 6 years. They studied there, and even during holidays, they had lessons. While this may sound demanding, some rules were occasionally relaxed. Napoleon was serious and studious, focusing mainly on subjects he enjoyed, such as history, geography, and mathematics. He didn't like Latin, seeing it as unnecessary for a soldier, and avoided doing translations. He also developed a skill for quickly picking out important details, a talent that would serve him in his future career. Napoleon was a dedicated student, but had trouble making friends. The language barrier was part of the problem, and his serious nature often clashed with the lighter attitude of his classmates. Yet his patriotism for Corsica burned fiercely. He even once shouted at a portrait of a French minister who had helped France take control of Corsica, vowing to make the French pay for it. He had a strong temper, challenging another cadet to a duel over an argument, and he formed only one close friendship with a classmate named Bourrienne, who later became his secretary. Despite his reputation as reserved and unsociable, Napoleon was respected by his classmates. He spent his free time in the library reading about heroic figures from history. During his time at Brienne, Napoleon also showed his military instincts. In a particularly cold winter, he led the situation in building a snow fort, organizing mock battles that sometimes resulted in minor injuries. Much to the dismay of the monks, he wore the school uniform, a blue coat with red facings, blue breeches, and a white trimmed waistcoat. Napoleon's time at Brienne, although not full of academic honors, did give him recognition for his strong will and leadership potential. He was awarded a shared first prize in mathematics, and he even commanded a group of cadets, which he valued more than his mixed academic results. When the school was inspected in 1784, an officer recommended that Napoleon to be promoted to the military school in Paris, describing him as an intelligent and promising, especially in math, although another inspector later described Napoleon as masterful, impetuous, and headstrong. These qualities would soon prove valuable. In October 1784, Napoleon entered the École Militaire in Paris, marking the next step on his journey. Without hesitation, Napoleon threw himself into his studies when he joined that military school in Paris. He aimed to join the artillery because it offered opportunities based on skill. At his final exam in 1785, he ranked 42nd average, not exceptional, suggesting he might have spent time learning things outside of the main curriculum. During his time at school, Napoleon made a close friend, Alexander Desmazis, who later held an important position under Napoleon's rule. This friendship shows that Napoleon was not only tough, but also capable of kindness, though many biographers overlook this. After graduating, Napoleon and Desmazis were assigned as officers in a regiment at Valence. Low on funds, they had to walk part of the way. Though Napoleon was young, he felt responsible for his family, especially after his father's death. In addition to his military duties, Napoleon attended various lectures to expand his knowledge. During this time, he began making friends, including Grégoire de Colombier, who invited him to her home, where he enjoyed the company of her daughter, Caroline. He remembered these innocent times fondly, saying that one of his happiest memories was simply eating cherries with her in a garden. Napoleon sometimes visited other friends, including Madame Junot, who later described him as funny and awkward in his big boots. One day, when her sister teased him, calling him Puss in Boots, he was upset, but later he laughed and gifted her a copy of the story as a form of apology. While he didn't stop studying, Napoleon began writing, which reflected a pessimistic tone, likely due to homesickness, overwork, and limited money. He even wrote about contemplating ending his life, showing that even great people have low moments. But he pushed through, telling himself that true wisdom lies in having determination. In 1786, he experienced a brief thrill when his company was sent to stop a rebellion, though the conflict ended before they even arrived. At one point, Napoleon returned to Corsica to help his struggling family. He also tried to get money owed to his late father by the government. While on the island, he worked on a history of Corsica and started writing fiction. In 1787, he briefly returned to Paris to follow up on the debt, but had no luck, so he went back to Corsica again. In 1789, France was in a turmoil, As the French Revolution began, Napoleon observed the social inequality and poverty of his countrymen, which led to anger and eventually to the revolution. Influenced by the ideas of thinkers like Rousseau, he watched as France descended into chaos, with even the king eventually being executed. Napoleon's main focus remained on Corsica, hoping it might break free from France. He organized locals to resist French rule and briefly led a national guard, though it was soon dissolved. Later, the National Assembly declared Corsica part of France, ending Napoleon's dream of independence. In 1791, Napoleon returned to France for military duties. Years later, he reflected on his youth, describing himself as solitary, focused on his studies, and ambitious. He found military life dull at first, filling his free time with reading and writing. His unique mix of practical skills and imaginations would later help him plan grand changes for Europe. However, his extreme confidence and ambition ultimately led to his downfall.